You want to know the truth, not the version they teach in the war colleges, not the polished one they carve onto the monument outside the Vorek Senate. I mean the real story, the one I saw with my own 3 eyes. I was there. I was there when they pulled him out of that wreck. And I was there, decades later, when his name made an entire fleet turn its ships around and run. So sit, listen, I'll tell it the way it happened. It started with a falling star that didn't burn out. I was young then, a dockkeeper's son on a mining moon called HFY. We were nobody, just a gray rock with a thin sky orbiting a world that nobody important cared about. The kind of place where you learned the names of the freighter captains because nothing else ever changed. The air always smelled of ozone and rust. The pumps in the lower tunnels never stopped humming, that low, bone-deep hum you stop hearing after a while, until the day it goes quiet, and then the silence frightens you. That night the silence came early. I remember it because my father stopped working. He never stopped working. He was a Thren, broad in the shoulders, gray-skinned, with those slow, careful hands that could fix anything with a wire and a curse. He was bent over a busted coolant valve when the whole sky lit up white, just for a second, like someone had struck a match the size of a continent. He looked up, I looked up, and then we saw it. A ship, or what was left of one. It came down trailing fire and it was screaming, not the engine, I mean it was actually screaming. A high tearing sound as the hull came apart in the upper atmosphere. Pieces broke off and spun away glowing. The main body kept falling. It was small enough that everyone assumed it would just be a crater and some scrap by morning. It hit the far ridge, past the old tailings field. The ground shook. A column of dust went up and hung there in the thin air like a gray ghost. My father said a word I wasn't supposed to know yet. Then he grabbed his coat. "Stay," he told me. I did not stay. By the time I caught up, half the moon was already there. You have to understand, nothing ever crashed on HFY. We were too small, too far off the lanes. So the crash was the most exciting thing that had happened in my entire short life, and apparently in everybody else's, because the whole settlement had come out into the cold with their lamps and their breathers, picking across the slag in a long, ragged line of bobbing lights. The wreck was worse than I expected. The ship had broken almost in half. One end was buried in the dirt, the other folded up like a crushed can. Steam hissed out of it. Something inside still sparked, throwing blue light against the dust. And there was a smell, blood, a lot of it. Not Thren blood that's thin and almost clear. This was thick red, the color of the warning lights on the pumps. I'd never smelled anything like it. None of us had. The first one to reach the hull was old Marital, the medic. She wasn't really a medic. She set bones and pulled teeth and once delivered a baby in the back of a hauler. But she was the closest thing we had, so when she shouted, everyone listened. "There's people in here," she said. Then quieter in a way that made the hair on my neck stand up. "There's bodies in here." They got the hatch open with a pry bar and 2 of the dockmen leaning their whole weight on it. Inside it was dark and slick and smelled of that red blood and burnt metal. Mara went in first with her lamp. I crept up to the edge of the hatch where the grown-ups had forgotten about me, the way they always forget about a quiet child, and I looked. I will never forget what I saw. 3 of them, the crew. They were a species I didn't recognize, tall, pale, hairless, with strange flat faces and only 2 eyes each, which seemed like a terrible disadvantage. 2 were clearly dead, burned and broken. The third, a female, was wedged against the far bulkhead with her arms wrapped around something, holding it the way you hold the most important thing you have ever held in your life. She was dying. You could see it. Mara got to her, and the female's lips moved, and she said something in a language none of us spoke. She said it over and over, and she pushed the bundle toward Mara with the very last of her strength. Then her 2 eyes went still, and she was gone. The bundle made a sound. It was a small, thin, furious sound. A cry. And the whole crowd of us, these tough mining people, gray and tired and not easily moved, We all went absolutely silent. Mara peeled back the blanket. It was a child, tiny, soft, pale like the dead ones, with a fuzz of dark hair on its head and a face screwed up red with rage and terror. 2 eyes screwed shut, 10 little fingers, all of them grabbing at the air, at nothing, at the cold. "What is it?" somebody whispered. "It's a baby," Mara said. "Whatever it is, it's a baby, and it's alive." Now here is where I have to tell you something about the Thren, about my people. We are not soft. The galaxy is not a soft place, and a soft people does not survive in it. We mine the dead moons. We breathe recycled air. We bury our own when the tunnels collapse, and we do not weep where others can see. We are practical to the point of cruelty, the bigger species always said about us. The gray people, the ones with no poetry. But here is the thing they never understood about us. We keep our promises. And that dying mother, with her last breath, in a language we could not speak, had still managed to make a promise pass from her hands to ours. She had given us her child. And the moment Mara Tull lifted that screaming pink thing out of the wreck and held it against her chest, every single Thren standing in that cold dust understood that the promise was now ours to keep. There was an argument, of course. There's always an argument. The supervisor, a fat, nervous Thren named Dodget, who reported to the mining company off-world, wanted to call the authorities. "It's not our problem," he kept saying. "It's a registered incident. There are forms, there are protocols. We don't even know what species it is. It could be dangerous. It could be sick. It could be." "It's a baby," Mara said again. She had stopped listening to him. She was already walking back toward the settlement with the child inside her coat. "And the cold is going to kill it before your forms ever arrive. So I'm taking it inside. You can fill out a form about that." My father walked beside her. So did half the crowd. Dodget stood there in the dust with his lamp and his protocols, and in the end, like all small men, he followed. That was the first night of the human boy on HFY. We didn't know what to call him. We didn't even know the word human yet. That came later when the records were searched and the wreck was identified. A refugee ship, it turned out, fleeing something far away, a war we'd never heard of, a species from a green world none of us could have found on a map. The mother's people, humans. There had been a whole ship of them once. Now there was one. This one. Crying in Mara Tull's kitchen, wrapped in a heating blanket, drinking warmed nutrient paste from the tip of her finger because we had nothing else to give him. Dodget filed his report. He really did. And the report went up the chain to the company, and from the company to some galactic office, and somewhere in that vast indifferent machine, a clerk decided that one orphaned alien infant on a worthless mining moon was not worth the fuel cost of a retrieval ship. So they left him with us. And we kept him. We named him Seth. It's a Thren name. It means more or less, the one who stayed. Mara chose it. She'd lost her own mate years before in a tunnel collapse and never had children, and from that first night, the way she held that boy, anyone could see what was happening. The hard old woman who set bones and pulled teeth had found the one thing she'd been missing. She raised him. We all raised him, really. That's how it works in a place like HFY. A child belongs to the whole settlement, gets cuffed on the ear by every adult and fed at every table. But Mara was his mother. There was never any doubt about that. He was a strange little creature to us. He grew faster than a Thren child. He laughed louder. He cried louder too, those first years, and the sound of it carried down the tunnels and people would smile, because it meant the boy was alive and well, and somehow that made the whole gray moon feel less gray. He had 2 eyes, which we all agreed was a shame, because it meant he couldn't see behind himself, and we worried about that constantly. He had soft skin that bruised if you looked at it wrong, and he got cold so easily that Mara knitted him sweaters out of recycled fiber, and he was always bundled up like a little grub. He had this absurd fragility about him. We were a tough people, and here was this delicate pink thing in the middle of us, and we became, I think this is the truth, We became gentle around him, in a way the Thren are not usually gentle. But he was not weak. This is the thing I want you to understand because everyone gets it wrong. They tell the story like the soft human was made strong by the hard aliens. That's not it. That's not it at all. Seth was strong from the start. He was the strongest of all of us. Not in the body, never in the body. He stayed lean and quick where we were broad and heavy. He was strong in a way we didn't have a word for. I'll give you an example. He was maybe 6 years old in our years. There was a boy named Ket who was older and bigger and mean the way some children are mean, and Ket used to torment a little Thren girl whose breathing implant made a whistling sound when she ran, made her cry every day. The adults didn't see it because children hide it from adults. And all of us other children, we just kept our heads down because that's what you do. You don't make trouble. Trouble gets you hurt. But Seth walked right up to Ket, this skinny pink boy half his size, and stood between him and the girl and said, "No." Just that, no. Ket knocked him down. Seth got up. Ket knocked him down again. Seth got up again. His lip was split and bleeding that red human blood, and he stood there swaying, and he said it again. No, and again, and again. He got knocked down maybe 6 times, each time he got up. And the thing was, he wasn't winning. He couldn't win. Ket was twice his size, but somewhere around the 6th time, Ket stopped. He just stopped. He didn't understand it. None of us understood it. Seth should have stayed down. Any of us would have stayed down. That's the sensible thing. That's survival. Seth didn't have a survival instinct. We decided. He had something else. Something that wouldn't let him stay on the ground while somebody who couldn't protect themselves was getting hurt. Ket walked away. He never touched the little girl again. And from that day, all the children of HFY followed Seth around like he was something out of a story, and in a way he was. I followed him too. I was one of those children. That whistling girl was my cousin. I never forgot what he did. I don't think any of us did. He grew up asking questions. That was the other thing about Seth. The Thren don't ask why very much. We ask how. How do we fix it? How do we survive it? How do we get through the next shift? Why is a luxury for people who have time and we never had time? But Seth asked why constantly. Why is the sky thin here? Why did my first mother die? Why do the company's ships take our ore and give us so little back? Why does Dodgett get to decide things when he's never been down a tunnel in his life? Why? Some of it drove the adults mad, but Mara never told him to stop. She told me once when I was older, she said, the Thren forgot how to ask why a long time ago. We just survive. That boy's going to remind us that surviving isn't the same as living. She was wiping down her medical table when she said it, not even looking at me. The hard old woman, she knew what she had on her hands. When Seth was 12, the company tried to shut down HFY. I remember the meeting. The whole settlement crammed into the main hall, and a company representative on the big screen. Not even a person, just a recording. That's how little they thought of us, explaining in a smooth voice that the ore yields had dropped below profitability, that the moon would be decommissioned, that we would be relocated to facilities appropriate to our labor classification. Relocated, they meant scattered, broken up, sent to a dozen different worse moons to die slow among strangers. Everything we'd built, every grave in the cold ground, abandoned because a number on a spreadsheet had gone the wrong direction. The adults sat there. That's what kills me looking back. They just sat there, gray and tired and beaten the way we'd been beaten our whole lives, because what could you do? You can't fight the company. The company is the sky and the air and the food. The company is everything. And then a 12-year-old human boy stood up in the back of the hall and said, "That's a lie." Everyone turned. "The yields didn't drop," Seth said. His voice cracked. He was 12, but he kept going. "I've been reading the logs. Dodgett falsified them. He's been skimming ore off the top shipments and selling it on the side, and he reported the difference as a yield drop to cover it. The moon's still profitable. He's stealing from the company and from us, and now he's going to let them scatter all of you to hide it." Dead silence. Dodgett went a shade of gray I'd never seen on a living Thren. How could you possibly? The rep's recording started, and Seth talked right over it, which nobody talked over the company ever. The shipment manifests don't match the extraction logs. I have copies. The mass is wrong by 11% every cycle for 2 years. You can check. You don't have to believe me, just check. They checked. He was right. That was the day the galaxy first heard the name Seth, though it didn't know it yet. Because the company, embarrassed, did an audit. And the audit found Dodgett's theft and a dozen other things. And in the cleanup that followed, an investigator from the company's central office came all the way out to HFY to interview the source. The source was a 13-year-old human in a hand-knit sweater. The investigator was a Vorak, tall, golden-eyed, one of the high species, the kind that ran things. She'd expected to find a disgruntled adult worker. Instead, she found a boy who taught himself to read company financial logs out of pure stubborn why, and who looked her dead in her golden eyes and was not afraid of her at all. I was there for part of it, hanging around the way I always did. I heard her ask him what he wanted as a reward. Reward money, a transfer to a better world, anything. And Seth said, I want you to leave HFY alone. Don't decommission it. Don't scatter these people. They're mine. The Vorak investigator looked at this skinny human boy claiming an entire moon full of gray miners as his, and something crossed her face that I didn't understand at the time. I understand it now. It was recognition. She'd met thousands of people across hundreds of worlds, all of them wanting things for themselves. And here was a child wanting something for everyone but himself. She kept HFY running. She made sure of it. It's still running today as a matter of fact. There's a school there now, and the air's been thickened, and the graves are still in the cold ground where they belong. But that's not the part that changed things. The part that changed things was that the Vorak investigator, her name was Inra Vale, remember it, she matters, went back to the central office and could not stop thinking about the boy. And she pulled the old crash report. The one Dodgett filed all those years ago. The one a clerk had decided wasn't worth a retrieval ship. And she read about the refugee ship, the humans, the war they'd been fleeing. And she found out the war was still going on. Let me tell you what the galaxy was like back then, so you understand what we were all living inside of. There was a power called the sovereignty. You might know it by the monuments they tore down, or you might be too young, in which case good, that means we won. But back then, the sovereignty was the closest thing the galaxy had to a god, and it was a cruel one. It wasn't a species. That's what made it so hard to fight. It was a system, an idea, a hierarchy that had wormed its way into 1,000 worlds over 1,000 years. At the top, a council of bloodless administrators who'd never seen the worlds they ruled. Below them, enforcer species bred for obedience. Below them, the client worlds that paid tribute. And below all of that, the labor worlds, the mines, the gray moons, places like HFY. The humans had been free once. Their green world was far out on the edge, and for a long time the sovereignty hadn't bothered with them. But the humans had something the sovereignty wanted. I won't bore you with the details. It was a kind of energy crystal that grew only on their world, the kind of thing wars are made of, and so the sovereignty came for them. And the humans, fool that they were, magnificent fools, they fought back. You don't fight the sovereignty. Everybody knows you don't fight the sovereignty. The species that fight the sovereignty stop existing. That's the whole point of the sovereignty. It is the machine that makes resistance pointless. The humans fought anyway. They lost, of course. They were always going to lose. They were one small world against a power that ate worlds for breakfast. But an Inra Vale found this in the old battle records, and it stopped her cold. The humans took 11 years to lose. 11 years. The sovereignty had crushed entire star-spanning civilizations in 11 months, and one green world held out for 11 years, and bled the sovereignty so badly in the process that the enforcer fleet still told stories about it. about the humans who wouldn't surrender, who'd retreat into their mountains and their oceans and their cities and make the enforcers pay for every single step, who, when the end came and the world fell, had still managed to launch a scattering of refugee ships into the dark, every one of them carrying the same thing, their children, sent away into the void with no destination, on the mathematical hope that the galaxy was big enough that some of them might survive. Almost none of them did. One of them crashed on a gray mining moon called HFY. Inra Vale sat in the central office of the Sovereignty. For that's who she worked for, of course. That's who the company worked for. We all worked for the Sovereignty whether we knew it or not. And she looked at the file on the boy who'd refused to be afraid of her, the boy who'd claimed a whole moon as his to protect, and she put two facts together. This boy is the last of the species that took 11 years to die. And he doesn't know it. She came back to HFY a year later, on her own time, with no company authorization, which for a Vorak was a dangerous thing to do. By then Seth was 14 and had grown a handspan taller and had started in his quiet, stubborn way to change the whole moon. He'd organized the children into a kind of school, teaching them what he taught himself. He'd talked the adults into pooling a fraction of their wages to thicken the air. He'd argued with 3 different company reps and won twice. He was becoming something. Everyone could feel it. We didn't have a word for it. We just knew that when Seth said a thing should be done, it got done, not because he made you, but because the way he said it made you ashamed of all the reasons you'd been telling yourself it couldn't be. Inra Vale found him in Mara's kitchen, where it had all started. I was there, 16 by then, gangly, useless, but I was always there. Somebody has to be the one who remembers things, and I suppose that was always going to be me. She told him the truth, all of it, where he came from. The green world, the 11-year war, the refugee ships, the mother who'd held him through re-entry and pushed him into a stranger's hands with her dying breath, the species that no longer existed anywhere in the galaxy except for one skinny boy in a hand-knit sweater in a kitchen on a gray moon. I watched his face the whole time. We all did. Mara had gone very still by the stove. I expected him to cry. He was 14. I expected him to break. He didn't. He sat there and took it all in with those 2 eyes, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. The pumps hummed in the tunnels below us. The thin wind scratched at the dome. And then he said, "I remember it exactly. I've repeated it 10,000 times since," he said. "So they're all gone, everyone like me. They're all dead." "Yes," said Inra Vale. "And the thing that killed them is still out there, still doing it to other worlds right now." "Yes," she said. Seth nodded slowly. He looked over at Mara, his mother, the hard gray woman who'd pulled him out of a wreck and named him the one who stayed. She looked back at him, and I swear something passed between them, something I was too young to read. Then Seth looked back at Inra Vale, and the thing in his face had changed. It wasn't grief. It had gone past grief into something colder and clearer, and absolutely terrifying on a 14-year-old. "Then I'm not the last one," he said. "I'm the first one of the ones who are going to stop it." Inra Vale, this Vorak, this golden-eyed agent of the Sovereignty, who had come here on a dangerous whim and didn't fully know why, she felt the floor shift under her. I saw it. She'd been expecting a grieving orphan. She'd found a declaration of war. "You're one boy," she said quietly, "on a moon no one's heard of. The Sovereignty has 10,000 fleets." And Seth smiled, the first cold smile I ever saw on him, and not the last. "My people took 11 years to die," he said, "with a whole world. Imagine what one of us can do with nothing left to lose." That should have been the end of it. A boy's brave words in a kitchen. The galaxy is full of brave words that come to nothing. The Sovereignty had heard 1 billion brave words and ground them all to dust. But here is where the story turns, and you need to pay attention, because this is the part the war colleges get wrong. They tell it like Seth built an army, like he gathered ships and weapons and led a glorious rebellion from the front, sword in hand, that kind of thing. The murals show him huge, golden, heroic. That's not what happened. What happened was much stranger and much more frightening, and it's the reason the galaxy trembled at his name instead of just adding it to the list of the dead. Seth understood something that no rebel before him had ever understood. He understood that you cannot beat the sovereignty with force. He'd done the math. He was always doing the math, and the math was hopeless. 10,000 fleets, a boy and a gray moon. There was no force in the galaxy that could win that fight. So he didn't fight with force. He fought with the one thing the sovereignty had never been able to defend against, because it had spent 1,000 years making sure no one had any. He fought with the truth. It started small. It always starts small. Inra Vale went back to her job at the central office, but she was changed now, the way you can't unsee a thing once you've seen it. And quietly, without quite admitting to herself what she was doing, she started feeding Seth information. Not weapons, not money, information, records, the real ore yields of 100 labor moons, the real death tolls in the mines, the real tribute being squeezed out of the client worlds, the lies the sovereignty told each world about all the other worlds. Because that was the sovereignty's great secret, you see. It ruled 1,000 worlds by keeping every one of them isolated and ignorant. Each labor moon thought it was the only one suffering. Each client world thought its tribute was uniquely necessary. Each enforcer species thought the worlds below it were savages who needed ruling. Nobody could see the whole picture. The sovereignty made very sure of that. The whole picture was the only weapon that could destroy it, and so the whole picture did not exist anywhere. It was scattered across 10,000 secret files in 10,000 offices, and no one had ever put it together. Seth put it together. That's what he did, all through his teenage years, in Mara's kitchen, and then in a workshop the settlement built him, surrounded by salvaged data cores and the children he'd taught who were now young adults who would follow him into a black hole. He took the scraps Inra Vale fed him, and the scraps 100 other quiet, frightened, decent people across the galaxy began to feed him once they heard there was someone collecting, and he assembled the one thing the sovereignty could not survive. He assembled the whole picture. A complete, undeniable, fully documented account of everything the sovereignty was doing to everyone. Every lie, every theft, every grave, cross-referenced, verified, impossible to dismiss as the ranting of one bitter world. The mining moon of Heshet 9 and the spice fields of a world called Tau, and the drowned cities of a place called All and the bred for obedience enforcer young who were taken from their parents at birth. All of it, all in one place, all true, all connected. And then he started to share it. Not broadcast it. They'd have jammed a broadcast and traced it, and the whole thing would have died in an afternoon. Number Seth was cleverer than that. He shared it the way water shares itself with stone, slowly, through the cracks, finding every gap. A data core slipped to a freighter captain who slipped it to a dockhand who slipped it to a miner on a different world who recognized her own life in it and wept and passed it on. The truth moving hand to hand, world to world, through the very labor networks the sovereignty had built to move ore, faster than the sovereignty could ever track, because the sovereignty had spent 1,000 years teaching everyone to be invisible, and now everyone was using their invisibility to carry the one thing that could set them free. And on every single data core at the very end was a short message, not a command, not a threat, just a few lines signed with a single name. You are not alone. They have told you that you are, because alone you are nothing. And together you are everything. Here is the proof. Look at what they have done to all of us. Now look at how many of us there are. Zeph, I want to stop here and tell you about the day I understood what he'd become. I was a grown Thren by then, worked the docks like my father. Seth and I were still closer maybe, because the children who'd grown up in his shadow had scattered to do his work across the galaxy, and I was one of the few who'd stayed on Heshet 9 with him and Mara. I helped run the workshop. I carried things and fixed things and kept watch, which was the only thing I was ever any good at. One night I found him alone in the workshop, surrounded by the soft glow of 100 data cores, and he looked tired in a way I'd never seen, tired in the bones. He was maybe 20 by then, still lean, still pink under the gray lights, still wearing one of Mara's sweaters, frayed now because he wouldn't let her knit him a new one. He said it brought him luck. "You should sleep," I told him. He didn't look up. "On Tau today," he said quietly, "the sovereignty executed 40 workers for possessing one of these." He touched a data core. 40, for holding a piece of plastic with the truth on it. I didn't know what to say, so I said the Thren thing, the practical thing, the survival thing. "Then maybe we should stop, before more people die." Seth finally looked up at me, and his face, God's his face. There was so much pain in it. The 40 dead on Tau were sitting in him like stones. He felt every single one of them. He never stopped feeling them. That was the price of being him. But under the pain was that cold, clear thing I'd first seen when he was 14. "They didn't die for a piece of plastic," he said. "They died because they'd rather die holding the truth than live believing the lie. Do you understand what that means? The sovereignty rules by making people afraid to die. And these workers on Tau today, they stopped being afraid. 40 of them. And tomorrow it'll be 400. And the day the number gets big enough, the sovereignty ends because the only thing it ever had was our fear, and we're running out of it." He turned back to his data cores. "We don't stop," he said. "We never stop. Stopping is the only way to lose." I stood there in the glow and I understood, finally, what the dying human mother had pushed into Mara Tull's hands all those years ago. Not a baby, not an orphan, a weapon the sovereignty had no defense against, a creature who could not be made afraid, who could not be made to stay on the ground, who would get up and say no a 7th time and an 8th and a 100th, until the thing that was knocking him down got so unsettled it stopped. The sovereignty had spent 1,000 years building a machine to crush hope. And the universe, in its strange mercy, had crashed the one thing that machine couldn't crush onto a gray moon where a hard people raised it gentle and let it grow strong. The sovereignty noticed eventually. Of course it did. By the time Seth was 23, the truth was on more worlds than the sovereignty could count. There were strikes in the labor moons, coordinated strikes, across systems, which had never happened before, which was supposed to be impossible because the worlds couldn't talk to each other, except now they could because Seth had given them a voice. There were client worlds quietly withholding tribute. There were Enforcer young, raised for obedience, beginning to ask the one question they'd never been allowed to ask: why? And every time the sovereignty's administrators tried to find the source, tried to trace the rot back to its root, they kept finding the same thing. A name. Always the same name, scratched into the bottom of every data core, whispered in every strike, painted on the walls of minds on worlds that had never heard of each other. Zeph. They didn't know who he was. That was the maddening thing for them. They assumed he was a vast organization, a coalition, a secret species. They could not conceive that he was one person because their entire worldview was built on the certainty that one person was nothing. They put a price on the name, an enormous one, larger than the price on entire rebel fleets which baffled their own enforcers. Why hunt a single signature so hard? Because the administrators, deep down, in the part of themselves they'd never admit to, were starting to be afraid. And they'd forgotten what fear felt like, because they'd been the ones making everyone else feel it for 1,000 years. They didn't recognize it. They just knew that something was wrong, something was loose in their perfect machine, something they couldn't grab hold of because it wasn't a thing. It was an idea, and you cannot shoot an idea, you cannot mine an idea, you cannot scatter an idea across a dozen worse moons to die. They sent a fleet to find the source. And the universe, which has a sense of humor as cold as a gray moon sky, sent that fleet by following a thread of intercepted data, by torturing a freighter captain who knew just enough toward a worthless mining moon on the edge of nowhere, toward HFY, toward home. I remember the morning we saw them coming. It was just like the night Seth arrived, in a terrible mirror sort of way. A light in the thin sky, except this time it didn't fall and burn out. This time it grew and resolved into ships, enforcer ships, sleek and black and bristling, more firepower in their smallest gunboat than our entire moon had ever seen. The settlement came out into the cold to look up, the way we had all those years ago. Gray faces, tired faces, older now. Mara was very old by then, leaning on a cane, but she came out too and stood beside her son and looked up at the death coming down out of the sky toward the place she'd lived her whole life. Seth looked up at the fleet that had come to kill him. And he was smiling. I have to tell you about that smile, because I'll never forget it and neither will anyone who saw it. It wasn't a brave smile. It wasn't a frightened pretending to be brave smile which I'd seen on a lot of people. It was something else. It was almost gentle, like he'd been waiting for this, and now that it was here, he wasn't afraid at all. He was just sad and certain and ready. Seth, I said, my voice was shaking. There's a whole fleet, we have nothing, we can't fight that. I know, he said. Then what do we do? He looked at me, 23 years old, the last human in the galaxy, wearing his mother's frayed sweater. We don't fight them, he said. We never fight with force. I told you that. Force is the only game they can win. He looked back up at the descending fleet and his smile changed, sharpened, became the cold, clear, terrible thing. We've spent 8 years, he said, telling the whole galaxy the truth, about everything they've done, about all of us, about how many of us there are. He spread his arms, almost like he was offering himself to the sky. And now, Seth said softly, they've come to make an example of me, to prove to everyone what happens to the ones who resist. They've come all this way with all their guns to do the one thing I've been praying they would do for 8 years. I didn't understand. I told you I was never the clever one. What's that? I asked. He turned to me, and there were tears in his 2 eyes now, but he was still smiling. They've come to give the whole watching galaxy, he said, one last thing to see. And high above us, the Enforcer fleet opened its gun ports and began its descent toward the gray moon called HFY. I told you the war colleges get the ending wrong. They show the fleet coming down and then they cut to the great victory, the triumph, the boy standing on the rubble of his enemies. They make it clean. It wasn't clean. Let me tell you how it really went. I was there. I held a tool I didn't know how to use and my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I watched the whole thing, and I have never told it the way it actually happened until now. The fleet came down over HFY, and the sky filled with black ships. The lead vessel was enormous. It blotted out half the thin sky. It came down low over the settlement, low enough that the wind off its engines blew the dust into stinging walls, low enough that we could see the gun ports along its belly, each one bigger than a person, each one tracking down toward the little gray dome where a few hundred frightened miners stood in the cold. A voice came out of the ship. It filled the whole sky. It was the kind of voice that had never in its life expected to be disobeyed, smooth, vast, bored, the voice of the sovereignty itself made into sound. This world harbors the criminal signature designated Seth, it said. You will surrender the source of the seditious transmissions. You have one of your minutes after that. This world and everything on it will be reduced to slag, as an example to all others who would spread lies against the sovereignty. Comply, and some of you may be permitted to live as laborers elsewhere. The sovereignty is merciful. The sovereignty is merciful. I'll never forget the way they said it, like it was a fact, like the sun is hot and the void is cold and the sovereignty is merciful, just one of the unchangeable truths of the universe. And our people gods, my people, I love them and it broke my heart. They turned and looked at Seth, not to hand him over. Not one of them moved toward him, but they looked at him, All those gray, tired, frightened faces, the way you look at the one person who's supposed to know what to do. And Marital, ancient, bent over her cane, his mother, the woman who'd lifted him out of a wreck. She stepped forward. She put herself between Seth and the ship, one old woman against a fleet. "You'll have to go through me," she said. Her voice didn't carry to the ship. It didn't need to, it carried to him. And the rest of them moved. All of them. The whole settlement of HFY stepped forward and put themselves between Seth and the guns, a little ragged gray wall of mining people who had nothing, who'd been beaten down their whole lives, who knew exactly what was about to happen to them and did it anyway. That's the thing they never tell you, that before Seth did anything at all, his people had already decided to die for him. The lost human boy had done that just by being among them for 23 years. He taught a beaten people how to stand up. But Seth wouldn't let them. He pushed through them, gently, putting his hands on shoulders, moving people aside, that frayed sweater bright against all the gray. He got to the front, past Mara, past all of them, and he stepped out alone into the open, into the stinging dust, under the belly of the ship, with all those guns tracking down to follow him. "Seth," I shouted. I couldn't help it. "Seth, don't." He looked back at me once, just once, and he gave me that gentle, terrible smile, and he said something I only understood much later. He said, "Watch and remember, you're the one who remembers things." Then he turned to face the ship, this one skinny pink human alone in the dust, and he raised his empty hands, and he said, not loudly, but somehow we all heard it, he said, "I'm Seth. I'm the one you came for. There's no organization, there's no coalition, there's no secret army, there's just me, one person. I'm what you sent a fleet to destroy." A pause, the whole sky waited. "You expect us to believe," said the vast, bored voice, "that one creature is responsible for." "I don't expect you to believe anything," Seth said. "I expect you to do exactly what you came to do. I expect you to kill me and everyone on this moon and slag this whole world as an example. I want you to. I've been hopping you wood for 8 years. Even the ship seemed to hesitate at that. And here is the part. This is the part. Listen, here is where Seth won the war. "Because you came here to make an example of me," he said, and now his voice did rise, and it rang off the dome and the dust and the bellows of the ships. "And you were right too. An example is exactly what this is going to be, but not the example you think." He spread his arms again, the way he had before, offering himself to the sky. "Every world you've ever crushed is watching this," he said. "Right now, I made sure of it. The same networks that carried the truth to them are carrying this back. Every mine, every client world, every enforcer who ever wondered why. They can all see this right now, your enormous fleet, your 1,000 guns, all of it brought to bear on one unarmed person and a few hundred miners who have nothing. They can see exactly what the sovereignty is. Not a god, not a fact of the universe, just this. A frightened machine pointing every weapon it has at one boy in a sweater. Because one boy in a sweater told the truth, and it could not make him stop." Silence from the ship, a long, long silence. "You can kill me," Seth said, quieter now. "You will, I know that, but you cannot kill me quietly anymore. You waited too long, you let the truth get out. And now whatever you do to me, the whole galaxy sees you do it. If you kill me, you prove every single word I ever said. If you let me live, you prove you've lost the power to stop me. There's no move left on the board that you win." He lowered his arms. "You should have ignored me," he said, almost kindly. "You should have let me be the crazy boy on the worthless moon. But you couldn't, could you? Because deep down you finally understood what I am. I'm the thing you spent 1,000 years making sure could never exist. I'm proof that one of us, alone with nothing, can make you afraid. I have wondered ever since what the administrators in that ship felt in that moment. Whether they understood. Whether they realized they'd been led, step by step, across the whole galaxy, to a trap made entirely out of their own cruelty. A trap where the only bait was a boy and the only weapon was their own need to crush him in front of everyone. I think they did understand at the end, because they did the worst possible thing they could have done, the thing that finished them. They fired anyway. The lead ship's belly guns lit up. I remember the light. I remember Mara screaming. I remember throwing myself flat in the dust with my useless tool, and the heat, and the sound. The sound was so loud it stopped being sound and became a thing pressing on my whole body. When the dust cleared, the front of the settlement was gone. The little dome where I'd grown up, where Seth had grown up, the kitchen where it all started, gone. Slagged to black glass. And Seth was gone too. They killed him. I want to be honest with you. The stories say he survived, that he escaped, that he ascended into legend untouched. He didn't. They killed him, the last human in the galaxy, in the dust of the moon that raised him, with his mother screaming his name a few steps behind him. The sovereignty got exactly what it came for. And in doing it, the sovereignty ended. Because Seth had been right about everything. The whole galaxy was watching. He'd made sure of it. That was the 8 years of work, the data cores, the networks, the truth moving hand to hand. He turned every one of those channels into a window, and through that window, 1,000 worlds watched the sovereignty bring its full might down on one unarmed boy who had only ever told the truth. And 1,000 worlds saw, all at the same time, the thing they'd each thought only they could see. They saw that the sovereignty was not a god. It was not the sky and the air. It was a frightened machine. And the machine had just done, in front of everyone, the one thing that proved it was frightened. You cannot rule by fear, once you've shown everyone that you're the one who's afraid. It didn't happen all at once. These things never do. But it happened fast, faster than anyone believed possible, because the truth had been building behind a dam for 8 years, and now the dam was gone. The strikes that had been quiet became loud. The client worlds that had been withholding tribute began withholding everything. The enforcer species, raised for obedience, looked at what they'd just been ordered to do, slag a moon of miners to kill one boy, and a great many of them put down their weapons and asked the question Seth had taught them to ask. Why? The administrators sent more fleets, of course, tried to crush the uprisings the old way. But the old way only ever worked when each world thought it was alone, and no world thought it was alone anymore. Every uprising they tried to crush, the whole galaxy watched them crush it, and every act of cruelty proved the truth all over again and made 10 more worlds rise. The sovereignty was drowning in its own weapon. The more force it used, the more it lost. In Reveal, remember her, the golden-eyed Vorak who started it all by being unable to stop thinking about a boy. She rose up inside the central office itself, with 100 others who'd been quietly waiting for the day. They didn't storm it with guns. They simply opened the doors, released the files, confirmed with their own high credentials that everything Seth had ever shared was true. It took 2 years. But the sovereignty that had ruled 1,000 worlds for 1,000 years came apart in 2 years, and the thing that came apart it was not a fleet or a weapon or an army. It was a boy who would not stay on the ground. I have to tell you about the name. Because the title of this story, the thing everyone says, the galaxy trembled at his name, they always think it means his enemies trembled in fear. It's the opposite. After he died, his name went everywhere. It was already everywhere, scratched on the bottom of every data core, whispered in every strike, but after Heshet 9 it became something more. It became the word people said when they meant stand up. When a worker on some far mine finally refused an unjust order, the others would say, quietly, Seth. When a frightened person did the brave thing anyway, Seth. When you got knocked down and got back up, Seth. So yes, the galaxy trembled at his name. It trembled the way you tremble when you're about to do the most frightening and necessary thing of your life. It trembled the way a beaten people trembles in the moment just before it finally decides to stand. His name didn't make people afraid. His name was the thing that came after the fear, the thing on the other side of it. The administrators of the dying sovereignty trembled at his name too at the end. But not the way they were used to others trembling at theirs. They trembled because they finally understood what he'd understood when he was 14 years old in a kitchen on a gray moon. That the most dangerous thing in the universe is not a fleet or a weapon. It is one person with nothing left to lose who has decided to tell the truth and will not, no matter what you do to them, stay on the ground. I'm old now, older than Mara was that day in the dust. I've outlived almost everyone in this story. Mara didn't last long after they killed him, grief mostly. But before she went, she did one thing. She made them rebuild the kitchen, the very spot. She insisted on it. She said a place where a thing like that began ought to still be standing, and nobody argued with her because by then the whole galaxy knew her name too, the woman who raised him, and what she wanted, she got. The kitchen's still there. I sit in it sometimes. There's a school attached to it now, full of children of a dozen species, free children who have never known a sovereignty and find it hard to believe it ever existed, the way you find it hard to believe in monsters once the lights are on. They learn his name in there. They learn it as history. They don't feel it the way I feel it. That's good. That's how it's supposed to be. He'd have wanted them to be free enough that his name could be just a story. But sometimes one of them asks me, because they know I was there, I'm the last one who was there. Sometimes one of them asks me what he was really like. The great Seth, the one who freed the galaxy. And I tell them the truth, which is not in any of the War College books. I tell them he was a skinny pink boy with 2 eyes and no instinct for survival, who got cold easily and wore his mother's sweaters until they fell apart. I tell them he asked why about everything until it drove the grown-ups mad. I tell them he wasn't brave the way you think. He was afraid plenty. He felt every death he ever caused sitting in him like a stone. He carried the whole weight of it, and it nearly broke him 100 times. I tell them the galaxy didn't tremble at his name, because he was a god or a warrior or a king. The galaxy trembled at his name because he was the proof. Proof that the thing they tell you, that you're alone, that you're nothing, that you can't fight it, that the cruelty is just how the universe is, proof that all of it is a lie. He was a lost human boy who fell out of the sky onto the worst moon in the galaxy, and a hard gray people raised him gentle, and he grew up to teach the whole watching universe the one true thing. That you are never as alone as they want you to believe, that together you are everything, and that you get up. No matter how many times they knock you down, you get up, and you say no, and you get up again, until the thing that's knocking you down finally understands it was never as strong as it pretended, and it was you all along who held the only weapon that mattered. The dying human mother pushed her child into a stranger's hands and said something in a language we couldn't speak. It took me my whole life to figure out what she must have been saying. I'll never know for sure. But I think she was saying the same thing all parents say, in every language, on every world, in the last moment when they send their children out into a dark, they won't survive themselves. Live, be more than this. Don't let it have been for nothing. He didn't let it be for nothing. The lost human boy, the one who stayed, the first of the ones who stopped it. You asked me for the truth, and that's the truth, not the monument's version. Mine, the version of the one who was there and who remembers because he told me to. Watch, he said, and remember, you're the one who remembers things. I've remembered, Seth. I've remembered every day. And now at last so will you.